She is the head of Europe's biggest economy, and some may say the head of the European Union itself. Angela Merkel's looking for a fourth term as German Chancellor. Is victory all but guaranteed? What would that mean, and what sort of woman is she? This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. You have to cast your mind back to 2005, 12 years now as Germans head and hoping for another 4. Angela Merkel's weathered political and financial storms, emerging, some may say, stronger than ever, if you believe the polls. So what does the future hold for the woman some also see as the real leader of the free world?
She's outlasted almost 100 other EU leaders. Having endured a global financial crisis, turmoil over immigration policy, and the disruption caused by Brexit, she is tipped to win Germany's national elections. The polls have put her up to 16 points ahead of the Social Democratic Party.
Currently the SPD is facing a mobilization problem. Most people vote for Merkel and say the CDU's government track record.
But what does she represent to Europe and the wider world? And could her power be challenged? Angela Merkel is one of this century's most enduring leaders. Under her, German unemployment has gone from a 70-year high to a record low. While many European countries were devastated by the 2008 financial crisis, Germany bounced back. Just 2 years later, its GDP had returned to pre-crash levels, growing faster than any other EU country. Some have called her the de facto leader of Europe, balancing European interests on a turbulent international stage. With the rise of populism in Europe and beyond, she's seen by some as the defender of the EU and of Western liberal democracy. But she's been criticised for enforcing an unpopular austerity policy in Europe. And her open door policy for asylum seekers has been seen by some as a failure.
Und wenn ich könnte, würde ich die Zeit viele, viele Jahre zurückspulen, mich mit der ganzen Bundesregierung und allen Verantwortungsträgern besser vorbereiten zu können auf die Situation, die uns dann im Spätsommer 2015.
In 2016, Merkel's party lost elections in her home state to the populist right-wing party AfD and the Social Democrats. And while the polls today show Angela Merkel as the favourite to win Germany's federal election, nearly half of Germans remain undecided. She's been derided, criticised and praised, seen as saviour and foe by those either side of Germany's borders. More than a decade on, the so-called eternal Chancellor looks likely to continue at the helm of Europe's biggest economy. As the German people cast their votes, how would a fourth Merkel term affect the future of not just Germany, but Europe and even the wider world?
Joining me from Berlin, Sergei Lagodinsky from the Heinrich Böll Foundation. He says Merkel's responsible for the rise of the right in that country. Actually, at the round table, on my right, William Cook, a journalist from The Spectator, who thinks Merkel's too neutral, just stands around and lets things happen. We have Matthew Vortrup, Professor of Political Science at Coventry University, written a book about Merkel, and she says she's handled the refugee crisis pretty well. Next to him, Leopold Traugott, policy analyst for Open Europe, who says Merkel is seen as strong internationally, perhaps, but not so much domestically. Thank you all for joining us on Roundtable. May I come to you, since you've written this book, which is about Europe's most influential leader, as you see her, what makes her so enduring?
I think in Germany, paradoxically, she's benefiting from the economic policies of her predecessor, who made some very difficult choices and curbed the welfare state in many ways. He was a social democrat. It was sort of like a Nixon goes to China kind of approach. So economically, the Germans like a sort of steady as she go kind of approach. So therefore, domestically, she's benefiting from that. Then she's also benefited from not having great challenges in previous elections. Schulz is somewhat different, which is a little bit of a paradox. And then I think the Germans quite like the sort of very calm, rational approach that Merkel has used. She's somebody who does not go off like a firecracker, but sort of analyzes things in the way that you would if you have a doctorate in conflict.
So Merkel, the person, I picked up this little bit that was written about her. It says she's egoless, introverted, and gives little credence to short-term issues. You believe she lets the currents move around her and reacts accordingly?
Yes, and I think it's a great strength for a politician. It's something our politicians here in Britain could learn a lot from, I think. Don't do something, just stand there, could be her mantra. And I think it's proved to be highly effective in the past. She's very skillful at letting bad news blow over, abiding her time, keeping her head down where necessary, and often events play into her hands as a result of that.
Fascinating, though, isn't it? That she's almost an enigma. Her parents decided to move her from West Germany to East Germany. We know that she's from East Germany, but they decided to go there. And she sort of led a quiet life, and then suddenly, bang, up she pops.
Definitely. What I think is so interesting, what you mentioned about the pragmatism and the style of leading from behind that many people accuse Merkel of doing, which is successful to some extent. And what we have seen is that in the two cases where she did it differently, where she acted impulsively, in the refugee crisis as well as after Fukushima, where she banned nuclear energy in Germany, these are two of the worst decisions for her in terms of popular support. So we can just say that the pragmatic approach is way more successful.
And let's go to Berlin and Sergei. Leopold mentions there the nuclear issue, he mentions the refugee crisis, both of which have been considered by many to be mistakes from Frau Merkel, but she's weathered the storm. How does she do that?
I think by maneuvering she is able to calm the mood, the anti-Merkel mood that was there. She turned from the left to the right with her minister, especially the Minister of Interior, Thomas de Maizière, who is playing the security card. She is trying to signal, and her party is trying to signal to everyone that they're going to be very harsh in terms of integration and terrorism, and also that the borders are in fact closed again for new immigrants. They are even playing now this game whether the family members of those who were able to come to Germany as refugees would be allowed to join them, which is actually international standard. But
okay, we'll come back to you in just a moment, Sergei, if we may. Who wants to pick up and describe Angela Merkel as a person, not a politician?
Well, I think
No, I was just going to say, I think there's a key photograph of Merkel, which I'm sure my friends here are familiar with. When she was first setting out as a politician, she was campaigning in Rügen, which is a fishing island on the northeast coast of Germany. And she's in a fisherman's hut. And she's surrounded by these fishermen. She's trying to get their votes. She's campaigning. She's trying to get her start in politics. What's key, all these people are talking, she's sat there listening. And I think that is a real template for her style. She lets other people talk, she listens, she absorbs, and then she finds a way forward that actually brings a lot of different, often quite paradoxical viewpoints on board. And that's been the source of her popularity, I think.
That's definitely true, and that's a vast difference, for example, now in the election to Martin Schulz, who we see bringing out all the strong words and giving the big speeches.
Strong speaker, yeah.
Yes, but who doesn't manage to translate this into actually electoral support. While Merkel, again, does a very calm electoral campaign and still leads in the surveys by far.
Yes, and it is quite interesting. I think it's Martin Schulz was sort of famous for the Klartext, I think the German word is, speaking, calling a spade, and so on. And I think that doesn't go down particularly well in Germany. I think they quite like the sort of Merkel approach. I mean, there was a word, Jugendwort des Jahres, a couple of years ago, young person's word of the year, which was Merkelen, to Merkel, which was sort of like to think about things, and then after you thought about it, you find finally make a decision. And there is a story that she has, she likes to, or that sort of people have spoken about, and her former husband, her first husband, who was called Merkel, her maiden name was Kassner, but he talked about when they got divorced, and it was a long time and things weren't going particularly well, and she wasn't saying anything, and suddenly one day she comes home and says, you can keep the furniture, I take the washing machine, and off she went. And I sometimes say that divorce settlement was a little bit like Brexit. We might get to keep the old furniture, and Europeans might get the more high-tech washing machine, so that's by a difference.
Der Spiegel online, and maybe it's just called Spiegel because I'm not certain about that at the moment, but it says Chancellor Angela Merkel's way of governing is to gauge the popular mood. We've discussed that, so that the German people feel they're almost governing themselves.
I think that's a very good point. And I mean, I think the gay marriage issue, just a couple of months ago, this really sums up Merkel's style.
Well, let's let it out. Gay marriage was approved. She didn't approve it. But she somehow managed to make people think that she'd done the right job.
Absolutely. What happened was she said, I'm going to give a free vote on this because it's an issue of conscience. She kind of knew, I think, that it would get carried, what with half of the CDU and the SPD as well. She then came out and said, I'm against this. So she managed to please everyone. Yeah. She stuck up for the right wing of her party and said, look, I'm for traditional values. She stuck up for the left wingers by saying, I've given you what you wanted. Everyone goes away happy, apart from Martin Schulz. What can he attack her about? Nothing.
No, and I think it's sort of like shooting foxes, basically, is her approach. There used to be Franz Josef Strauss, who was a leader of the CSU in Bavaria, who would say that there should never be a party to the right of CSU. And Angela Merkel then sort of half-jokingly said there should never be a party to the left of the CDU. So on certain issues, on green issues, she's basically stolen their fire. On some issues, she's stolen the fire of the Social Democrats. And therefore, she might have moved, as Sergei, I think, was suggesting, have created a space for the right. But she's done that by trying to get votes from the centre and following this approach of what do the Germans like and what is good for German business, has proved electorally very successful.
You know the English expression, still waters run deep.
Yes.
Is that the case with her, or are they just still waters?
I think they run deep, definitely. So she's definitely thinking about what to do.
So she's smart,
as
well as pragmatic.
Yes, no question about that. Yeah. So that's also going to be something we will see with Brexit, for example. There's no big announcements from her yet on what Germany will do.
She would just simply wait until after the election?
Yeah, she will wait after the election, first of all, so not to get attacked by Martin Schulz beforehand, for example. And also there's a lot of debate in the UK currently whether Germany or Merkel will save the UK in Brexit negotiations. I think in the end what she will do is just to pursue German national interest in a very pragmatic way. And this means on the one hand making sure that there is continuous trade between UK and Germany, but also, and this is way more important, that the single market stays functioning and coherent. Because this is where the main interest of German industry lies, with a complex supply chain spanning through all the EU 27. So, this still waters run deep will also be the model for her Brexit negotiations.
We'll come back to you in just a moment, but we've re-established some contact with Berlin. And Sergei, there, what are Angela Merkel's priorities with the European Union? Does she drive the agenda, or does she, as we've suggested here, sit back and wait and see what happens and then get the best out of whatever situation she happens to be in?
Well, actually, if you talk to the political figures and analytical minds here, everyone is waiting until this election is over, because everyone knows Merkel is going to win, and everyone hopes that after she has won, she will sit down with Macron and they will make up the plan for Europe. So during the election campaign, European policies is a non-issue. Nobody talks about them. Actually, nobody mentions and nobody notices that her probable coalition partner, the Free Democrats, have a very austerity-focused program that will probably bring a lot of disturbances to the market. But it's a non-issue because nobody's talking about European Union. Everyone talks about refugees, even about Russia, but not about European policy issues.
So William, what do you believe that she sees as her future, or Germany's future, with the European Union, and the way she wants to drive the European project, as some are perhaps disparagingly called it?
Well, it's true. She is a big driver of the European project. She can't help but be a big driver. Germany's the richest country in Europe. It's the most populous country in Europe. And it's sat right in the middle of Europe with 9 land borders with other countries that surround it. But equally, because Germany is so powerful, it's very important for Merkel and Germany that Germany is not seen to be bossing the other countries around. And this is where I think British voices are guilty of wishful thinking that Merkel's going to step in and do some kind of deal that suits Britain and Germany because Germany sells Britain lots of cars. It's not going to happen. Germany is going to scupper its chances if the other European countries feel that Germany's bossing them around. So Germany has to tiptoe around these countries, even countries that are much smaller and less powerful and less prosperous. It has to be the good European, and that is key to Merkel's policy.
So Brexit's not top of her agenda. It's those countries that surround her and the influence they have.
Yes, and I think very much so. And I think it's also important when you say driving the European project. I think the European project is quite different from the sort of like the federalized Europe that people used to think about. When they had a second bailout for Greece, she insisted that the International Monetary Fund was involved and they contributed to the bailout so that it would be multilateral. And the French said, well, why would we have that? And they were kicked into touch fairly quickly because, you know, Germany has a bit more power there. And Helmut Kohl was then said to have criticized that and said to her, "You are destroying the Europe I created," to which she responded, "But Dr. Kohl, that Europe doesn't exist anymore." So I think her Europe is different from the Helmut Kohl Europe, which was the sort of like, the flag with the yellow stars and so on. For her, the European Union, as indeed for the French, it is a pragmatic tool for forwarding German interests.
It sort of sounds to me that although she's saying I'm not in charge of all this, it's just up to everybody else, that she is really in charge, isn't she?
Well, yes and no. As William rightly put, said, Germany is the richest country in Germany, the most powerful as well, but it cannot govern alone. It's just one out of 28, soon 27 countries. And so it needs to build coalitions also across EU member states in order to pursue its own goals. And this is something Merkel also does very well, simply because, again, she's pragmatic, she's silent mostly. So she builds the coalitions, she knows where she wants to go, but she doesn't boast about it or bring about great speeches. She just acts.
Let's bring up three presidents of big countries. We've got President Erdogan, we've got President Putin, we've got President Trump, none of whom really get on with her. Is that because she is pliant in so many ways, they can't read her, or what is it?
Well, I think although they might not get on with her, I think they respect her, and I think she understands them. I mean, for instance, I think
they can't intimidate her, can they?
Yeah, I think Merkel's upbringing in the communist East Germany has stood her in very good stead. She knows when to keep quiet. She knows the dangers of saying too much. She knows the value of listening and watching and waiting for the right opportunity. She grew up in a culture where it was very dangerous to say too much or to be a loudmouth. She speaks fluent Russian. She gets Putin in a way that the rest of us who don't speak Putin's language can't begin to get him. Obviously, Germany has a huge Turkish immigrant population, so she's got a connection with Turkey as well. I think she
has a connection with Turkey, perhaps, but not with President Erdogan, who's told the Turks in Germany not to vote for her.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to go down very well. I think we've sort of tried to tell Americans who to vote for in the past, and it's usually blown up in our faces, and I don't think that's going to work.
Sergei, let me come to you and talk about the international pressures that she may or may not face. What do you think the biggest challenge for her there is?
I think one of the biggest challenges will be dealing with our neighbors. We will be having a lot of turbulences vis-à-vis Turkey, and you saw that she was basically cornered by her opponent. She did not want to insist on stopping negotiations, accession negotiations with Turkey, but she was basically forced by the Social Democrats to take this position. I do think we will be having some turbulences vis-à-vis Russia, also because it is not clear who the coalition partners are going to be. We see Social Democrats moving towards Russia, showing more openness towards Russia. We see Free Democrats, the market-oriented party, very probable candidates for the coalition, who also show openness. This does not match her own agenda, an agenda which had a very clear stance on Russia and sanctions against Russia. And of course, we have a transatlantic alliance which is basically dying after the White House has been taken over by a populist American president. And it's very difficult for her as a transatlanticist to find her way of how to deal with that between cooperation and opposition.
Gentlemen at the table, exam question here. Describe Angela Merkel's strongest trait, her weakest trait, and tell me whether anybody you know says they actually like her. Not so much admire her, but actually like her.
Well, I think in a way, the fact that she's admired more than liked is a testament to her success. And what she's done with her party, the Christian Democratic Union, used to be a very stuffy party, not really a right-wing party so much as a traditional old-fashioned party. And she's made it very modern and very inclusive, and all things to all men. To a certain extent. There are young people now who feel it's cool to vote CDU, who never would have dreamt of voting CDU in the past. The CDU is the party of your parents or your grandparents. But by creating a broad church, inevitably people aren't as passionate as they would be about a Corbyn figure, for instance.
Has she been responsible for marginalising some people in Germany? Sergei has suggested that she's encouraged the right.
I think she has encouraged the right. I think if you look at the people
dangerous,
who were,
perhaps, or not?
Well, electorally, it's probably quite clever because you don't win elections on the far right. And I think if you sort of pander to the far right and you take over their agenda, that can end up like David Cameron tried to do with UKIP, and much good did that do him, I suppose. I think what is interesting, if you look at Friedrich Merz, who was somebody who could have taken over from her, who was the speaker in Parliament before, who was quite a right-wing person who talked about German Leitkultur, so German leading culture, and go back to reading in Goethe and that sort of thing. And there were other people at the time who were known as the choir boy generation, who were sort of Catholic boy scout types. All of those are very CDU, and there was very Southern Catholic tradition. She has she sort of challenged that, and then she's turned into a sort of waffly kind of Eastern Protestant thing, which isn't really too concerned about. I think when you say people don't like her...
No, I didn't say that. I said, have you ever heard anybody say they like her?
Several people, yes, because people who have dealt with it, Barack Obama being one, joked that in private she can be very sort of chatty. She imitates voices. One of the things, she can imitate the former Pope, Pope Benedict, and could sort of like tells jokes,
German,
like who's German, of course. And Barack Obama was with her when she was watching Bayern Munich play Chelsea, and they lost, and then she told him certain German swear words he could then use, just that would be appropriate. So
okay, so there is another side,
funny person,
another side
yes.
to her. What's her biggest weakness?
I think her biggest weakness is the same as her biggest strength, simply the fact that she waits before she acts. And many see it as a weakness, because many want a leader, someone who actually shows them the way and leads the country, and that's not her. As you know, she waits, she looks what the public wants, and then she does that, in most cases. And I think this is both her weakness and her strength.
Sergei, let me come to you as we start to wrap this up and talk about, let's assume that she is going to be the next German Chancellor. What's Germany going to look like? I know it depends on who she gets into bed with figuratively and politically, but what do you think the country is going to be like?
I think we're going to be facing quite a different political landscape, and the reason is our three letters. AFD, you know, the Alternative for Germany. We will have for the first time, probably with 12, maybe even more %, a party which is at least populist, if not nationalist or fascist, in the middle of the Bundestag. If they are going to be a third largest party, they will have also procedural rights within the Bundestag, which will elevate them in the eyes of the public. And we will have a totally different discussion culture. They will shift the boundaries of discussion culture in the Bundestag, and this will be translated through the media all over the country. We will be having serious problems, and I am personally quite curious, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this particular chancellor, will deal with that as a person. Because we were talking about right or left. I think Merkel is a child of the GDR transition, and for many of those people, they were not socialized in this dichotomy of right and left. For her, it is about authoritarian versus free regime. That's why she's so flexible about her political agendas.
If we bring it back in here, just Sergei,
really
thank you.
looking forward how she's going to face that.
As we wrap this up, who wants to sort of say, if the scenario as painted by Sergei comes to pass, is Germany going to be a fascinating place to watch for the next 4 years, more so than it has been?
It's going to be very awkward because there's going to be a party that's the third biggest party in the Bundestag that nobody wants to have anything to do with that. And that, to a certain extent, is a major embarrassment for German democracy. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. Are the AfD going to move into a more respectable position, even where they might work with other parties in the future? If they don't, then they're going to be a cuckoo in the nest.
But also, I think when what we've seen from the Landtagsparlament is that whenever they get in, they tend to squabble a bit and they fall out with each other. So I think they might also disintegrate because they don't quite have a clear platform of where they're going. I mean, we've seen before we had the Republikaner in the 90s who were also gradually marginalized. So I think what I think is interesting in the next few years is we don't know what's going to happen. We have a woman whose major achievement we don't know is going to happen. We have a woman whose major achievements are things she has never campaigned for. She never campaigned for open immigration. She never campaigned for saving the Greeks. She never campaigned for getting rid of nuclear power. And yet she's remembered for things she's never won an election on.
I'm going to have to say thank you. Thank you. And we've come to the end of the programme. Thanks very much indeed for being with us here on Roundtable. 12 years already, a myriad of problems overcome, challenges met, and yet to some extent we don't really know what sort of person she actually is. Described as an enigma in one case, and by one of our guests today as Europe's most influential leader. The next 4 years, whatever they have in store for Germany, will be fascinating. I hope you follow us here on Roundtable as we continue to discuss what's happening with the European project and with Germany in particular. From me, David Foster, and the rest of the team, thank you for watching. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.